I'm going to have this discussion today on gold culture. Gold culture as it relates to establishing a new way to relate to the world, a new way to relate to one another, and how best we can organize our political, social, cultural, economic, and military life around our interests. To have a firm grasp of what gold culture is, you first may have to understand what transfer culture is. We addressed that in the previous political education piece. To truly grasp gold culture, you have to understand the ideology of New African revolutionary nationalism. The 500-year-long struggle of New African people to liberate themselves from the system of slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism has been hindered primarily by the lack of a broad-based embracement of New African scientific ideology and organization. NARN has addressed this and continues to do so, but not nearly on the scale that would be required for genuine liberation. This ideological legacy is due to the oppressor's elimination of internal communications by African people globally, and also because the colonial system produced a historical and cultural discontinuity among New African people the world over. In the simplest terms I can place this, our culture was annihilated. Our language, the way we traditionally related to one another through the perspective of Ujima and Ujima, things that have sustained us as perhaps one of the most advanced cultures in human civilization for thousands of years, was stripped away from us during the period of shadow slavery. As a result of destroying the historical and cultural continuity within traditional African society, through our process of becoming new Africans, we found it very difficult, extraordinarily hard, to produce a comprehensive gold culture, one that reaches beyond the boundaries of the particular colonial oppressor, in this case, the United States of America. A vast majority of our people cannot think beyond the confines of the dominant culture. It's one of the primary reasons that they continue to engage enthusiastically in their own oppression. Why they view the only path to liberation through paths paved by the very individuals that have been responsible for their oppression over the course of 500 years. While we keep chasing sidewalk escapism and petty hustling as some viable alternative to national liberation. That's why we continue to suffer, die, be imprisoned. While we continue to sell our labor for a pittance of the profits the capitalists make in order to enrich them in a cycle of wage slavery that we have yet to find a way to liberate ourselves from, even though we know exactly what needs to be done. Within the colonial system, and make no mistake, the New African in America is a colonized nation within the nation, was the justification of cultural and historic castration. You even find amongst the so-called conscious those elements that look upon genuine New African culture, and I'm talking about revolutionary scientific socialism, as a genuine African cultural principle, as something that is alien, and instead embrace the very system that put them in the position that we find ourselves in today, capitalism, as somehow being a viable alternative, something to be embraced. The cultural superstructure of European racism caused African people to negate and have an inferiority complex toward their own ethnic heritage. It's one of the reasons you see our people seeking to bleach their skin, press their hair, hating what they see in the mirror, because they've been orientated and taught to do so. Unlike other people, liberation for the new African in America is a more difficult question due to the historical, cultural, psychological, and physical disassociation from pre-colonial African society. How we were orientated and divided, our language, our cultural values, the very mores that made us one people across hundreds of tribes, but a contiguous cultural identity was stripped from us. The racist superstructure of colonialism states that there was no history, there was no culture, there was no civilization prior to Europeans' enslavement of Africa. We were in effect a cultureless people. We know this to be false. The true narrative is, in fact, that we are the ones that introduced human civilization to Europeans some 5,000 years ago, even though we held it some 2,500 years before that. Understanding gold culture is understanding the psychology of oppression itself. It's understanding how you overcome the assimilation process. And it is not merely something that is economic in nature or purely political in nature or even purely cultural in nature. It, in fact, impacts every area of people activity. African people must engage in a cultural and historical rediscovery as they correctly engage in revolutionary action. This is a simultaneous process. This means in the process of struggling for revolution, for genuine state power, for our own independence, African people in America must undergo a historical and cultural revolution at the same time, synonymous with the political, economic, and self-defense social change, which we call New African Revolution. This means that New African people must not only develop a revolutionary ideology, which we currently have, NARN, but we also have to develop a transfer culture within every single revolutionary movement that we produce. The revolutionary forces of the People's Republic of New Africa have already begun this process. It is encapsulated within the Autonomous Infrastructure Mission, within the George Jackson University, within the Assad Alert Network, within all the various units and organizations which make up the revolutionary forces of the People's Republic of New Africa, be it the George Jackson Grassroots Collective, Sustainable Agricultural Commune, Youth Community Action Program, George Jackson Gun Club. I could go on ad nauseam. But these formations are the template for transfer culture and the prerequisite for gold culture. Transfer culture provides the rational dynamic, the calculation within the developing strategy of revolution. Strategies of revolution demand central organization, centralized leadership, and a tightly knit internal communication system. New African revolutionaries must deal with first the formation of a gold culture, the formation of an internal society that sets goals and standards for the new society that we plan to build. The new ideological, political, psychological formations which make up the people's core psychology. Simply stated, the revolutionary apparatus, you and me, together, must set standards which the people can see and understand for what this new society is going to look like if NARN is going to be meaningful to the people. This is why I always stress to comrades, organization must be practical. It must be relatable. We oftentimes look at revolution and think in broad terms. These vast sweeping strokes. That's not revolution. At least not at this stage of development. Revolution is when you can go and have a conversation with that brother or sister that's hanging on the corner and convince that brother or sister that's hanging on the corner and the other brothers and sisters hanging on the corner that they can pool their money together and they ain't got to be on the corner no more. They can actually do something that feeds, clothes, houses, educates, strengthens, and defends simply by working together. That is revolution. That is transfer culture. That is moving from one way of life, which is not viable, to a new, progressive, and viable, life-giving way of living. Transfer culture is symbols within the ideology of New African revolutionary nationalism that molds the people's minds in judging right and wrong. A group judgment. And it gives the people the basic framework of what the revolution is. The failure of the vast majority of New African struggles globally. I'm not just talking about here in the United States. Has been primarily because the potential New African intelligentsia have been alienated from the indigenous cultural mores that could lead revolutionary nationalist ideology and a genuine NARN party. What I mean by that is those of us who actually do possess the intellect to analyze the people's social conditions, the contradictions that the people face on a day-to-day basis, from drug addiction to sexual promiscuity to gang banging to dope dealing, and articulate these things in terms that the average man or woman can not only understand but can relate to, and create solutions to those contradictions, which are practical, manageable, and possible. I've told comrades on numerous occasions what ideology is. But within the context of gold culture, ideology is a truly practical thing. Ideology is the systematic, scientific, cultural, economic, political, social, moral values of a people. Right now, the predominant ideological standpoint of New African people in the North American region of this world is not New African revolutionary nationalism. It's capitalist white supremacy. It's the notion that somehow the very individual responsible for your oppression over the course of the last 496 years is going to give you a path to power. And that's simply not true. And no matter how many of us die, how many of us are murdered in our homes, how many of us are in prison and given disproportionate sentences, no matter how many of us are driven to the bottom rung of society, we still participate. We still submit. We still call ourselves Americans. Y'all wonder where the humor in my tone comes from. It's because the notion is laughable. We are not Americans. Our infant mortality rate our incarceration rate, our median income, our employment rate, our educational development. Every single metric of human civilization places us at the bottom rung of humanity. And that's not by chance or happenstance. It places us at the top rung of every negative metric. And that's not by chance or happenstance. That's by design. Yet, even though the 496-year historical record to look upon, still got our people calling themselves Americans. Even though Americans have killed Africans as a matter of national policy for 496 years. That's irrational. It don't make no sense. It undermines the very notion of revolutionary social change. And when we speak of revolution, we are merely talking about aggressive, life-sustaining, life-giving change. Before we can even consider the serious notion of revolution in North America for new African people, we have to have a viable gold culture. In dealing with the development of an ideology like NARN, we are dealing with the social development of ideas. In the course of social development, there is change and development of ideology. One ideology replaces another, just as revolutionary black nationalism replaced black nationalism. New African revolutionary nationalism expanded our understanding and replaced revolutionary black nationalism. At some point in the future, something is going to replace NARN. This is the ever onward and upward cyclical process of ideological development. In the same society, you have to understand, you ain't going to have no monolithic worldview. Different and rival ideologies and interests, which clash with one another, are common. Such is the case now. You literally have an ideological war going on between NARN, predatory capitalism, bourgeois black nationalism, American patriotism, which is nothing more than subordination to capitalist assimilation, religious fervor, and I can go on and on and on and on. But an ideology has no independent development. Just as there is no such thing as art for art's sake or culture for culture's sake. All art, culture, and ideology represents a political tendency, independent of the development of the material conditions of social life. An interest. When we view NARN within the prism of gold culture, that political tendency is freedom. That political tendency is genuine independence. That political tendency is genuine state power. That political tendency is ascendance. That political tendency is strength. NARN seeks to make us strong again. And to do so on our terms, utilizing our intelligence for us, utilizing our treasure for us, utilizing our imaginations for us, utilizing our strength to make us strong again. The difficulty experienced by poor black folks in America in becoming aware of our collective international, national, and class interests is increased by the corrupting influence of capitalism and white supremacy, of assimilations, integrationist ideology, and the propaganda that the white overclass conducts with a definite aim of misleading poor black folks. The best school, this is what I'm constantly telling comrades, of national, international, and class consciousness for New African people in America is day-to-day struggle, including the struggle for immediate interests. And it's the reason that we formed the aim in the first place, to force our people into these day-to-day struggles on their own terms. But that alone is not enough to produce gold culture. The New African America, in order to reach a high level of national, international, and class consciousness, must take NARN to its next level. That next level is mobilization. It's practical application of our ideological beliefs in day-to-day life. This involves a socialist worldview, a scientific theory that uses revolutionary tactics, which will show the New African in America the path to liberation and power. The struggle for the New African underclass, and I'm talking about poor black folks in this country, for their immediate interests is not sufficient to give birth to a socialist worldview when they've been orientated and indoctrinated on capitalism, on greed, on consumer materialism from their mama's teeth. When it was reinforced in the elementary school, when kids would tease other kids for having no name brand shoes, even to adulthood, in every area of people activity. We must change how our people think, what they value, and why they value. The doctrine of socialism is the economic theory of New African revolutionary internationalism. It's the path to winning the world. It's a path to freeing everybody, not just us. Play its part in the world liberation struggle. The scientific world outlook, revolutionary scientific socialism, must become the possession, the philosophy, and primary ideological weapon of the masses of New African people in this country and across the world. Many people think that ideological struggle takes in political debates and arguments and in political affairs alone. That is an incorrect analysis of the reality of the situation. Ideological struggle is a part of a dialectical process that is endless. It never stops until such time as the principal contradictions of the oppressed and the oppressor are eliminated. It is a constant and permanent struggle to teach and win the people over to New African revolutionary nationalism's particular political view. Daily organizing is an ideological struggle. Truly New African revolutionary nationalist system will eventually replace the capitalist system that exists today. That truly is inevitable. Primary reason is capitalism is predicated upon expansion. And it is impossible for infinite expansion on a sphere with finite resources. Even now, they are brushing up against the very environmental constraints of the world itself. And the world is pushing back. So when we speak of gold culture, we have to move beyond these narrow interpretations of what a culture is. We have to move past these incorrect interpretations of what socialism is. We have to move past many of the beefs, the points of contradiction between New African people. It aims to transform the core psychology of a people to the degree that they don't even look at themselves the same way. Individualism is what currently rules the minds of the vast majority of black folks in America. This I and me mentality. This notion that I come first and fuck everybody else. Y'all, please excuse my French, but I'm keeping it real with you. Right? That is not our cultural identity or our cultural thought process. That is one that was instilled in us by our oppressor. That is the mind, the evil, warped, twisted mind that crafted the chattel slave system. I'm going to break that down for you. It's important that I do so. In NARN, what are we doing? We are carrying out a revolution of social and cultural systems. The change from private to public ownership. A change in the political and cultural structures from bourgeois capitalist democracy to black people dictate what goes on in their own society. From Western hedonism to more Eastern value. We have to have faith first that the new African underclass in America is ready to advance step by step along the road of socialism under the leadership of our new African Revolutionary Nationalist Vanguard Party. And second, that the NARN Party is capable of leading the black underclass along this very rocky road. That's going to require a leap of faith. But that leap of faith is impossible at the current level of our people's ideological or psychological makeup. New African Revolutionary Nationalism has an objective. And that objective is self-determination for new African people. When we speak of gold culture, one of the primary central components of gold culture is self-determination. It's the capacity to say what we learn, what we eat, what we build, and how we build it. Unlike dogmatic ideological worldviews like Marxism or revolutionary nationalists who have yet to fully develop, we don't want to live under the exact same system that was responsible for our oppression, that was responsible for our enslavement, that was responsible for the very contradictions that we live with every single day in the ghettos of America. New African Revolutionary Nationalism is not just a bunch of phrases or slogans. It is a science of national liberation revolution. Too many quote-unquote revolutionaries spend time selling whoop tickets, talking big shit, instead of studying the ideology of NARN, instead of studying history, instead of studying the science of social change. The New African Revolutionary Nationalists must seek victories whenever and wherever we can get them. We must agitate within the system until we get a base from which a genuine revolutionary struggle can be effectively launched. Y'all keep hearing me go back to this, but I'm going to go back to it again. This is the purpose of the aim. If we have no foundation upon which a nation can be built, if we don't have our own institutions, if we don't have the basic infrastructure to feed, clothe, house, educate, defend the people, there ain't going to be no revolution. You can get it out your head. There will be no transfer culture. And they definitely will never be a gold culture until such time we are successful in building the basic framework to feed, clothe, house, educate, and defend ourselves. Gold culture is a revolution of the mind. And reforming how our people think, we have to create institutions which will provide that information. Because the oppressor ain't going to teach you how to be free. They ain't even going to teach you how to think. They're going to teach you what to think. Critical thinking runs contrary to their interests. A step towards African revolutionary nationalism involves us creating our own educational institutions. Institutions which will teach progressive social change. Such institutions are not in the interest of the current power structure. It's one of the reasons why they run around state after state banning certain books. Because they just don't want the truth out there. A broad-based grasp and use of historical truth would ultimately lead most people, if they're utilizing critical thought, to certain inevitable conclusions. Conclusions like, we need to embrace NARN. That's what's genuinely in our interest. And they can't have that. But what we can do is work to get New African teenagers and New African children and get a reasonable amount of community control of what we teach our kids. The teaching the true history and revolutionary science. It has to take place outside the school system. It's one of the reasons why the New African Math and Science Center initiative is central. It's one of the reasons why the Jonathan Jackson Academy is central. Why the George Jackson University remains central. New African revolutionary nationalists must set up liberation schools to train cadre. It's that simple. Gold culture is a process of psychological liberation. It is quite literally freeing the minds of the masses. If we can control the educational process of our New African people, which is not only in the racist class school systems, and it ain't gonna never be there. It ain't gonna never be in the mass media. We have to bring it to our homes. We have to bring it to the hood. We got to bring it to our communities. It has to be easily accessible. Something that excites the minds of our kids. If we concentrate on orientating this generation, then we will have the New African revolutionary workers of the next generation. More advanced than us. More dedicated than us. More determined than us. We will have the fertile foundation for gold culture. It's important that we have our own information dissemination apparatus if gold culture is actually going to be a success in this country. That means we got to have our own newsletters, our own social media presences. We have to have our own quote-unquote mass media in which information can be presented as it truly is through the prism of New African revolutionary nationalism. A New African revolutionary nationalist believes that the question of racism, the exploitation of a people based on race, economically, socially, and politically, is a historical question. And perhaps one of the number one contradictions facing us in this century. The only way that contradiction is going to be resolved is through a revolutionary transformation of social relationships, not merely in this country, but globally. People who identify themselves as white, not all, not by a long shot, but the vast majority of them, eagerly participate in the systems which maintain our perpetual oppression. These systems can no longer be allowed to govern human civilization. They must be changed fundamentally. And I don't mean reform. I mean destroyed, utterly. And new systems put in place to replace them. Ones that are controlled by those who were previously oppressed. When this is changed, the majority of the world's people will finally rule the planet. And I mean the people who are brown skinned, and yellow skinned, and black skinned, and red skinned. I mean people of color. When those who have been subjected to the system of global white supremacy are actually the ones who have the power and can enforce what is right, can craft laws which are truly humane, which are truly colorblind. There will be no racism. Understand something. Gold culture, perhaps more than anything else, is a transformation of the core psychology of the people. You may be asking me, how do we do this? How do we change the very core psychology of an entire nation of people? It begins with the truth. Gold culture begins with a practical embracing of certain salient truths which undermine the system of oppression. Capitalism would have you believe that competition, that cutthroat, dog eat dog breed, is the only viable engine to a high level prosperity in social life. That's a lie. It's untrue. It's fundamentally so. You have to understand this first and foremost to understand gold culture. Gold culture does not value profit. Gold culture values human need. Gold culture does not value money. Gold culture values people. And they place them first. Gold culture is an orientation which forces the minds of the people to truly contemplate a life outside of the dominant culture, outside of capitalism, outside of white supremacy. What does social life look like when we are not forced to view the world through their eyes? Understand something. New African pride in having a New African culture, and I mean a genuine New African culture with traditional African values, are not ends in themselves for New African Revolutionary National. Though we know that these things serve as instruments and symbols, pride, and New African Revolutionary consciousness, we also realize that revolution is more than changing how you look and wearing different clothing. we also realize that it is changing what is in your mind and changing the ways and actions that you carry out in order to change society as a whole. Gold culture is a cultural revolution. And I don't mean a cultural revolution in the traditional sense. The cultural revolution is necessary. It's a necessary pre-stage for a political revolution. It's a pre-stage for an independent nation. Before anything like that can take place. But it's not the last stage. Many comrades make the mistake and they get too hung up on the term culture. And they don't get hung up enough on the term gold. More and more New African revolutionary nationalists, if they are sincere, need to take off them dashikis and all that stuff, man, and go down to the pool halls and the street corners and the spots where the homies hang out and talk to them brothers and sisters. Talk to them brothers and sisters that's from the street. Ones that just got out the joint. Them brothers and sisters that ain't got nothing to lose and everything to gain. When we able to convince the ordinary brother and sister, the ones from the street, why we need a nation of our own, and the Republic of New Africa, it won't be a long way off. It'll be right around the corner. While the cultural revolution is necessary, it's not gold culture. Most people deal with the question of New African unity romantically. They have these pie in the sky ideals of uniformity. They feel that all groups should unite or eventually will unite. And that simply ain't true. What many of them don't understand, it's important that we begin to understand this, is that these different groups represent different class interests, political interests, economic interests. And each one of them interests has their own ideology. We have to take into account that while the masses have an emotional unity, because everybody getting the same foot put up their ass, we also have to take into account the fact that programmatically of organization, vast majority of our people are confused and divided. It's the reason why one brother can see another brother with his hat turned to the left or to the right, or wearing red or blue, and they will rationalize pulling out a gun and murdering that brother. They are genuinely confused. They don't realize that the dude that supposedly is from the other side, that op ain't your op. That your op is the dude that's gonna slap them handcuffs on you after you squeeze that trigger. Your op is the dude that's gonna leave the dude that you just killed in the street, laying on his back, not even a cover, for hours. He don't give a damn about neither one of you. It might even pat you on the back, killing another brother. You have to understand those varying interests, ideologies, and beliefs. They're not really real. And I don't mean they're not real in the sense of having a reality. I mean they're not real in the sense of your interests. They are diametrically opposed to your interests. They have created this confusion and division amongst our people on purpose. They've done it in order to ensure that they remain in power. So the question remains, how do we achieve genuine gold culture through unity in this state of varying differences and mass confusion? NARN has an answer to that question. First step is for New African revolutionary nationalists and those who agree on the basic principles to unite and form a single New African United Front. We have already established the framework for it. It's called Revolutionary Forces of the People's Republic of New Africa. This doesn't mean that any group needs to dissolve its autonomy, or whether we work in common cause, in common agreement, toward our collective national interests. But it must be realized that unity on a larger scale will have to be forged ideologically. That means we have to win the people over the norm. If we have a genuine, powerful, united front, we can apply pressure anywhere in this society that we want to. If we are effective in establishing organizing cadres amongst our youth and organized amongst the masses of our people, you're going to have more exposure than NARN. And that greater exposure to NARN, meaning that greater exposure to the truth, will transform a greater number of people. This means organizing for the Black United Front primarily from below and not from above. And what I mean by above, I mean relying on them bourgeois elements, those reformist leaders, those collaborators. We ain't sick of transforming them, dude. This organizing from below should be based on our youth. That's who we should be primarily targeting for the development of gold culture. It's the kids, it's the teenagers, it's the 20-year-olds. In order to do this, a movement must be started to revolutionize the minds of our people in order to uproot ways and create new ways to cause an internal revolution, a true, genuine transformation in core psychology. The purpose of gold culture is to destroy the conditioned white oppressors' mores, their values, their attitudes, their ways, their customs, their philosophies, their habits, which we, the oppressed, have been taught and trained to imbibe as normal. This means establishing on a mass scale a new revolutionary culture. We call it transfer culture. It allows a mechanism, a vehicle for our people to move from the oppressor's mindset to gold culture. Gold culture is a revolution of one's values. And the people's values determines one's actions, what you do. The reason why the African nation is not prepared for a genuine political revolution is because its cultural values are tied to the oppressive system. There's this scene in The Matrix that I often reference. It's when Morpheus is explaining to Neo what the Matrix is. And they're in a place called the Construct, and this chick in a red dress walks by Neo. Right in the midst of Morpheus explaining what the Matrix is, Neo checks out this chick in a red dress and hurry up and look back at Morpheus. Morpheus says, freeze program. He tells Neo to turn around and look. When Neo turns around and look, he's staring down the barrel of a Desert Eagle held by one of the agents of the Matrix. He explains to Neo where they are. It's not the matrix, it's the construct. And they bring people here to teach them one salient truth, one inescapable lesson. That if they have not been disconnected, that the people are so woefully dependent on the system itself, that if they're not one of us, at any moment, they could become an agent and kill you dead. Gold culture is a reconstruction of a people's culture and way of life. It occurs in this relatively short span of time. What does it change? It changes the values of people, the way they think, act, and react to everything. It changes their social habits, the informal mores that they have. It changes the people's relationship to one another. It heavily influences the family structure of the people. It changes their dress and their language, both formal and informal. It changes the spiritual systems and ideological worldviews that a people hold true and dear to them. It changes the political, economic, and cultural ideology of a people. It brings forth a new historical interpretation, one based on their experience and not what they've been told to believe. It presents them a new form of political expression. It presents a political system in which they have the power. Our primary historical experience living under bourgeois democracy in the United States has been death, misery, and suffering. A colonized nation within a nation. Therefore, the concept of a society that is dictated by us, a new society, a new political system, guarantees that we will not be at the mercy of racist or greedy bourgeois elements ever again. Understand something. Gold culture produces a new economic relationship with both the productive system and one another. One that's beneficial to our people. When the African people was kidnapped from the continent of Africa, placed on those slave ships, and tossed into the maw, the chattel slave system, and its developing counterpart, capitalism. European man was living under a feudalist system initially. But the merchant class, the slave traders, and the poor towns made so much money off of buying and selling our people, off our flesh, off our free labor, that they succeeded overthrowing the feudalist system and establishing an entirely new system, capitalism. Our enslavement was the primitive accumulation of capital necessary to produce the system which oppresses us today. It is wholly irrational. It is historically unthinkable that we would embrace such a system as a path of freedom. It is insane. People look at the Civil War from a historical perspective and point to it as though it was some point of great liberation for our people. All it was industrial capitalism, funking with agrarian capital. Civil War was a capitalist revolution. Had nothing to do with us. The capitalist class assumed absolute power. And we have lived over 400 years under the capitalist system in America. Our plight is almost the same as it was under slavery. I could take you to some spots in Louisiana and Mississippi that you wouldn't be able to tell from 1845. The capitalists betrayed New African people during the period of Reconstruction, when they used New Africans to gain political power and then left them to the hands of the KKK in the North and the South. And we call ourselves American. They promised our people 40 acres under view, but they reneged on that promise because they knew full well that if you gave New African people at that time that much land, it would also give them power. It would cause an agrarian revolution because we knew how to work that land better than them. We could make it more productive than them. And unlike them, we shared everything with one another because we were at a point in history where we didn't have no choice. It was a survival mechanism. The very concept of New African socialism has endured amongst our people. It has been a source of life for us. Some of the hardest times that we've ever experienced in the story of humanity. New African people working together for the benefit of the whole New African nation and not for the benefit of a few greedy Uncle Toms could bring forth a new economic order for our people. A gold culture changes the social life of a nation. It influences the family structure, giving the New African family a purpose and a new direction that will help them come to power. Gold culture changes all aspects of a people's culture, making it revolutionary and making it serve the interests of the global human population. Gold culture is nothing short than a total commitment to transforming this world from what it is to what we want it to be. If we are to ever have gold culture, we must forge the foundation through transfer culture. If you are listening to my voice, you should have one all-consuming thought in your mind. How can we build the aim everywhere? How can we build chapters of the George Jackson University, the Johnson Jackson Academy, George Jackson Grassroots Collective? How can we forge a silent alert networks, closed circuit economic initiatives, sustainable agricultural communes, youth community action program, secure community mandates in every community where our people live, think, and play? How can we create gold culture? Think on these things. They're cause for great meditation.